Are you struggling with roadblocks as a woman in the challenging and constantly changing world of corporate America? If you feel stuck in your career, you may be holding yourself back and may not even realize it. Prepare to be enlightened by the meaningful discussions here at the No Woman Left Behind podcast. Each week, gather the insight you need to break down those walls of limiting beliefs. Unleash your full potential and unlock the leader within. Listen to raw conversations with corporate women as they share inspiring stories with the purpose of obtaining their dream career and living a truly fulfilling life. Here's your host, Rosie Zilinskas.
Hey everyone, welcome to the No Woman Left Behind show. I'm Rosie Zilinskas. I invited Laurie Battaglia to the show because she is a gender equality expert and she has so much to teach us. When Laurie Battaglia was a little girl, she realized early on that she was treated differently than her brothers. Ultimately, this led her into the battle of gender equality, a cause that she championed throughout her 35-year corporate career. And as she's sometimes experienced feelings of belonging and not belonging at work, she created her company Aligned at Work and her Aligned Leader Model to build leaders who understood and embodied inclusion in their people leadership. Laurie Battaglia is the CEO of Aligned at Work in Scottsdale, Arizona. You definitely don't want to miss the conversation with Laurie. Stay tuned. Okay, Laurie, thank you so very much for being here today. Laurie, I'm going to start right away and ask you a question about gender equality. I know that you've said that women don't necessarily take the risk to level up and men do. Mm-hmm. So what exactly is it that men are doing that women aren't doing when it comes to their careers?
You know, it's kind of interesting. It's a both and for me in that I think in the past, we used to try to go to correct the women. So I think it's a both and in that there's a system out there that's invisible to most of us until we run up against it. We don't really see that. And we keep thinking if we do this one more thing, then we'll be able to take that next promotion. So what I see a lot is that women don't necessarily, and again, I will preface this by saying not everybody, but some women will not step in without having the ability to check every box on the job description that's posted. And if there's that one thing, then they wait till they get it. But the line keeps moving. You know, the job descriptions keep morphing and the expectations go up. And meanwhile, we're not really getting ahead. And there's an old story about, you know, a guy, if he has 6 of the things out of 10, will go for it. And the woman has to have 9.5 and is apologizing for not having the other half of them. Yeah. And I find that to still be true with many people in the workplace is that they're relentlessly pursuing education. It's just like, what's the next certification? What's the next degree? I did see somebody who I don't actually know on LinkedIn who was like, proud because she just got her MBA and now she's going to go for a master's in human resources. And I'm thinking at my age with my experience, to what end? Because we oftentimes think it's going to get us a far bigger paycheck and it doesn't.
Right.
It's other stuff that gets us that bigger paycheck.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I know you said that women need to check all the boxes. So I know that's, you know, a very common thing. I also know that women may not use their voice to speak up. But then I guess I go back to my question. So what are men doing? Or what is it that makes them just go for it?
You know, I talk to as many men that don't go for it because of their own stories that they tell themselves. But the ones that do have oftentimes somehow convinced themselves or been brought up in an atmosphere where they were taught that they were all that and then some and worthy of getting it. And I think, you know, not to go too deep into the esoteric here, but I think a lot of it is a lack of worthy or feeling like you're not doing something right. They talk imposter syndrome. I hear from as many men who have that as women, but no, that's a lie. I hear from men who have it and they're starting to talk about it, but women, we're kind of schooled in talking about it now. It's a thing that we can talk about. So it's coming around with the men, and they're beginning to admit I have imposter syndrome too.
Interesting.
But they do step in sometimes. On the other hand, the system is stacked toward their benefit many times. There is again, a thing that gets said out there that I don't know the source of it, that says that men will get promoted on potential.
Okay.
And women have to do the job for a while before they're allowed to have it. And that was my experience 40 some years ago. And it's still happening.
Yeah. And,
So
it's just, it's so sad. Not only to mention that the pandemic has now set us back. And I had read an article that said that it set us back 10 years. I actually heard another clinical psychologist, I think she said it was 30 years. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's going from bad to worse. Yeah, I hope not too. Well, again, it's like, it's very interesting how gender equality does play in the workplace. But I guess the bottom line that I want to bring up here is that, and you brought it to our attention, is that some men do actually feel that, imposter syndrome, but I think because we're women, we talk about it so much more. So,
yeah.
Okay. So Laurie, I know that you are a diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging consultant. So you do a ton of work with that. So how does DEI work come into play in corporate today?
Wow. It's a very hot topic for most organizations. Now, some have been doing it. I'm trying to think, when did I first hear? Probably the mid 80s to late 90s. Some of the larger organizations have been talking diversity since way back when. And I will say that some of the ways that we went about it, the training that happened and things like that, have traumatized people and made them not want to really take it on. But on the other hand, what I'm seeing is that you kind of can't put it off any longer. So I'm 65 years old. I came of age in high school in the early 70s. My husband's late 60s. And the 60s were that time of race riots and civil rights and all of those things coming to the forefront. And then through the 70s, we started to see laws shift and change. That didn't mean behavior shifted and changed. So we were talking about it since, the 70s kind of did this, and then the women's movement and all that. And then organizations started talking diversity. What I saw happen then was that inclusion word came in because some organizations would do a great job of getting people that didn't look like us, whoever us were, whoever the white people that ran things at that point, predominantly white men at that point, especially. And so if they didn't look like us, we got them in, and then we told them they had to behave differently and they couldn't do this and they couldn't do that. And we did nothing to make them feel like they really had any power at work. So it was just another disempowering conversation, but they were lucky to have that job, right? So that was the message that would sort of come out. Well, you're lucky you have that. And so people would put up with the abuse, sometimes overt, sometimes covert. Equity and belonging are later stage things. So it was always diversity and inclusion, diversity and inclusion. And that went on for a number of years now. And people have made a good attempt at it. Consultants have made a good living at it. It's been awesome. And then in 2020, the murder of George Floyd just accelerated everything right back into the forefront, like it was the 60s again. Wasn't that anything had necessarily, well, let's put it this way, it's sort of like looking at the women's movement. We've come a long way, baby. And in some ways, we haven't come far at all. So there's this same thing with racial kinds of issues. We've come a long way, baby, and nothing's changed. So there's that both and kind of thing. So to answer your question, even the smaller organizations now are realizing they can't get by with ignoring diversity and inclusion, or they can't make it just the women care about that, or just the Black people care about that, or just the Indigenous people care about that. It's everybody needs to care about that. Not everybody does.
Right.
So that's where my work comes in.
And, to your point of not everybody does, I will say that it's it's a little bit of not everybody does, because they may not even be aware of, the fact that they should care about,
Right.
Diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? So
Right.
it's like they've just never been exposed to, people of color or whatever the situation is. So
Yep.
it's always very interesting when you realize, oh, wow. And that happened to me too, as far as, when everything happened with George Floyd, I started educating myself, and I was like, how could I have just not been aware, or not even known that I had to be aware, so I will say that it is very different. And I'm 100% Mexican. So I know I don't look 100% Mexican, but I am 100% Mexican. So I have had different types of discrimination throughout my life, people talking about me in front of me in Spanish, and then me responding to them in Spanish. And, the person is like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry.
Oops.
So, but so back to so a lot of companies are now doing work in DEI. And so I guess my next question to that is, you and I talked about what my mission is. So my mission is to eradicate the gender gap in the world in corporate, and I'm doing it by trying to empower women in their careers. Mm-hmm. So when we're talking about DEI in corporate, what are you seeing that is making a difference for women in their careers?
I wanted to go a different place with that question.
That's fine.
Give the tail end of it there. I was going to go off into what really lights me up is seeing people's eyes opened. I think in a lot of cases for women, it's understanding that there's a system in place and that you can choose to play it or not play it. Now, my mission is to shift the system, that it serves everybody. So I was going to kind of go into the systems and seeing people's eyes get opened, especially white men, because they don't, and not all, they don't believe there's a system, because when you are benefiting from something, you don't see it as a system. So one of the conversations I had with my colleague, Tish, who does the training with me, Tish is Black, I'm white. Tish is almost 6 foot, I'm 5'2". We look pretty funny when we stand next to each other. So she's a bit younger than I am too. So we had a conversation about me using I admitted that I had used what I call my old lady white privilege to not have to, this was near the beginning of the pandemic when we were all masked up and gloved and everything. And I had shoved a receipt in my purse somewhere, and I was all loaded up walking out of Walmart. And the only reason I was at Walmart was because my husband had risk factors and I was less risky to go get the Walmart run. So I'm in Walmart and I am like, I don't have my receipt out and they're going to check me. And then I thought, no, they're not. And I walked right out without ever, have a nice day. Thank you. You too. Stay well. And Tish and I had that conversation with a client, and we were talking about the things that you uncover about yourself as you do this work and how it morphs and changes all the time. And I said, I admit that I used my old white lady privilege to walk out of Walmart without ever having to stop and dig for my receipt. And Tish said, ask me how often I can do that. Oh. And then we went into a conversation about the things that had happened to her and the way she'd been treated, stores, airports, and all this. I never knew that. I never knew it because our friends that are people of color don't share that stuff with us. If they do, heaven mercy, we might call them an angry Black woman or something like that because, oh, she's all worked up about everything all the time. No, there's a really good reason for it. But if I'm benefiting from that, and if I weren't doing diversity work, I would just think it was my right to walk out of Walmart, having earned my whatever at age 60 something at that point, that I was entitled to that. I mean, frankly, that's what's in the back of my head. They can see I'm not stealing anything.
Right.
Let's put the white lady on for a minute. And I had to realize that, like, I was using that, and it happened as the hair whitened. I felt like I'd earned my age, and I'd earned, getting followed in stores and having to walk with my hands behind me and all that, because they did follow me like that. But it's not the same experience that Tish has had or that her grown men sons have had. I don't have to have those conversations with my grown son that she's had to have with her grown son.
Right.
So I think I went off down a different path there, but
no, that's perfectly fine. Now, you said something about people using the system. Can we like unpack that a little bit more? Like, what are some other examples that people are using the system, or what do you even mean by using the system? Let's kind of go back to basics there.
Yeah, I think if we go way back to the workplace, at some point, you know, and white men are feeling very like this today because we're blaming them for everything. It predates any white man that is alive today. It predates. It's just that if that system serves me, why wouldn't I hang on to it? So they always say the fish doesn't know it's in water, or we don't know we're breathing air. So if it doesn't feel like anything at all, then we don't think there's a system there. Those systems of how to get promoted. When I go back and I think about entering the workplace in 1978, which is when I first got into the savings and loan business and into banking, I'd done a little retail, a little factory work before that. But now I'm in the white collar world of, you know, wearing good clothes to the office. And all the guys went to lunch together. And I wasn't invited. So I would watch them walk out. And I finally said to my boss, Rich, I want to come along to lunch. He's like, you really don't. There's really nothing going on there. And I said, yeah, but you all know each other. And, you know, I'm an outsider. You all can go to the same bathroom. And at that point, there weren't very many women in leadership at that place. So we all went to the same bathroom, but we weren't having like leadership conversations in the bathroom. And they probably were. They went golfing. They went out for happy hour. The women weren't invited along, didn't go golfing, all those kinds of things. Those were things I had to fight as I kind of went along. And I remember kind of the first time I claimed my power was saying to Rich, well, I'm going to go to lunch with you. And he's like, suit yourself. And so when they all came down from the mezzanine, he stopped at the bottom and he looked toward my office, and I came running across the lobby to catch up with them. And all the guys stopped and looked at me like, what's going on? He's right. There was nothing going on there. But it was that familiarity that, you know, there was this structured way that a man came into the workplace and earned his way up. And back in those days, they wanted to know, did you have a wife and family? And by the way, if I, the wife, was working, did my husband have a job? Because then I wasn't supporting the family. And they didn't know what to do with the first divorced woman that we had working at that bank, because they used to put Mrs. or Miss on the nameplate. So there's all these systems that we don't even give any conscious thought to. Now it sounds crazy, but it was a thing. It was a big thing. It was a life-changing thing in those days. And it's not till we acknowledge that there could be a system around us that doesn't feel right to us as women, maybe because we have our relationships too, but in those days got asked to bring in the coffee and the donuts and all those kinds of things.
Got it.
We have to unpack it and then figure out what it is that gets us ahead.
And I think this is why, for me, it's really important to share with women the statistic that I think you and I talked about previously, as far as I think Hewlett Packard did a study of their staff like many years ago, and they were the ones that identified that amongst their staff, the men applied having the 60% of skills, but the women waited till they have 100% of skills. So I think that's why I'm so passionate about sharing that information, just that one little thing with women, because when they know that men apply with 60% of the skills, even though it's a data statistic, it's still valid today. And I think it's really important by just being aware that that's happening. I think that's one of the ways that we can challenge the system that you're talking about, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, I think it is just making people aware. It's sort of like bringing it out and holding the light of day on it and saying, okay, this is the system. Do you want to play the game? Because if you do, here's the rules.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, they're not written down anywhere. So,
right.
You know, and that was another thing that from the old days, before we knew what the term mentor meant, a lot of people kind of had an understudy or a person that they brought along with them, and you sort of rode the coattails once you'd proved yourself. And if he went up, you went up, and all those kinds of things happen. I think these days we've done a lot to put the things out there to women. You're doing great work making these things transparent. Oh, by the way, salary transparency, we could go down that one too. Yes, 2 thumbs up.
How about it?
But we make these things transparent, and then people decide, do they want to opt into this? Do they want to change the game? Do they want to play the game? Do they want to just opt out and not play the game at all? Create their own game? There's a lot of ways you can go, but the way we were kind of schooled all these years was, here's the game, play it or step aside, get walked over. And typically women didn't feel right playing it. People in the LGBTQ community might not feel good playing it, might cover up who they are. People with different abilities, or let's say I ride in a I use a wheelchair to get around. I might not ever even come in to apply for the job in the first place, because I'm convinced there's no way, because every experience I've had tells me there's no way.
Absolutely. Okay, so I want to shift a little bit, Laurie, to the work that you do in the LGBTQ plus community. So tell me a little bit about what you're doing with that, and how does that come into the workplace?
Yeah. So I'll just give a friend of mine a plug for a book that's actually launching today as we record this. It's called Imagine Belonging, and his name is Rhodes Perry. And Rhodes is a trans man. Now, he puts that out there. If that was a secret, I wouldn't say it.
Right.
So, but he puts that out there, and he talks about his experiences with belonging and how he worked in the White House for a while back, and not feeling like he was really safe there and all those kinds of things. It was Rhodes that first said to me, well, Laurie, gender's not binary. And I was like, well, whoa, wait. That puts some words around something I've experienced, seen, thought about my whole life, and seeing it on different people and all that. What do you mean it's not binary? It was just like that moment of, I got to think about that. What it did was, it took me out of the purely feminist fight that I was in for so many years. It took me, like, I had fought hard for equality. Then I got so tired of fighting, and I met my husband, Joe, and he was more a feminist than I was, or as much as, and I was like, you carry that for a while. And then I got back in a different way, and then was going strong, and Rhodes said that. And I was like, I don't know. So I started to really realize, and within the period of time that I met Rhodes, I saw Chaz Bono speak, who's transgender. I had another friend's child transition, and now she's an important part of my world. And so there was just all this stuff happening around me. I'm like, maybe I better pay attention. And I knew I had made it one day when someone with one of my female friends with a deeper voice was talking, and my husband said, who was that? Was that one of your trans friends? And I was like, yeah, no, no, it was not. But I feel like we've, like it's just a normal part of conversation in our house.
Right.
So I have if I'm a straight white boomer woman, but I love my LGBTQ friends and family members, and, everybody that takes part in that community.
Right. So you, and I want to make sure that we define this for our listeners, right? So you said non-binary. So let's define that so that everybody is clear on what we're talking about.
Okay. So when we say LGBTQ and then plus, and I won't get all these, when we go past the plus, I won't get this all right. But so it's lesbian, which is women who love women, gay, which is men who love men, or attracted to, either way, whatever you want to say there. LGB, so that's bisexual. I go for either gender. I don't, but one could. T is transgender, where a person's born inside one body with one gender and realizes that that gender is not the one that they were meant to have, and they transition to the other gender. And there's many different of all of these, there's many different flavors and ways to go about it. And then Q is interesting because it can be queer, it can be questioning. I think it was a conversation we had, Rosie, where the younger generation is okay with the word queer, or somebody else. The younger generation is okay with the word queer, but to my generation, it was used as a slur. And so there's different ways of looking at that. Am I queer? Am I questioning? And then there's the way I define myself gender-wise. And then there's also the way I might define myself sexually. Who am I attracted to? And so that's a whole sexual orientation is different than gender identity. And it's making the corporate people go insane because it keeps changing. And we've got other terms because there's an IA, and I'm going to get that wrong. So I'm not going to go down that path. But basically, if I'm a cisgender, white, heterosexual female, it means that I was born as a female. I identify as a female. I identify as Caucasian. I am straight or heterosexual because I'm attracted to men. I'm a boomer because I'm 65 and I'm sort of right in the middle of the baby boomer generation, 1964 to 46 to 64 birth age. And I think that's it for me. And by the way, that's called intersectionality. All the ways I define myself.
Wow. Yeah, that's a lot.
So much, so many ways.
And non-binary is what?
Non-binary is when you don't identify with either gender. So think of gender as a spectrum with male on one end and female on the other. Where are you on that? And sometimes you don't feel like you're a she or a he. And so non-binary people will typically go by they, or they might go by she and they, or he and they, depending on how they feel that day.
Got it.
So
okay.
It's interesting being on the receiving end of it because you're not quite sure. The rules are constantly changing.
Yes, I do know that like all of the, I don't want to say definitions or characteristics. I don't even know how to properly say it, but the LGBTQ plus is constantly evolving and changing, which is good. Yes. Because it gives us or it gives them, the language to be comfortable in their skin and be who they are. Now, how do we translate that information into the workplace? Is there, with the diversity, equity, and inclusion, is the LGBTQ plus community recognized? Are they making headway in corporate? Like, how is that working?
Yes, for the most part, and no. So I think most workplaces, not all, would say, oh, we're good with LGBTQ community. What they mean is they're okay if you're lesbian or gay. I think this is Laurie's total opinion. No research here. I think they're perfectly fine if somebody's a lesbian and it's two women together or two men together. Yes, there's going to be people who aren't okay with that, but for the most part, the world and corporate is. Then you get into transgender. And for a while there, nobody quite knew what to do with that. So people have created, everything from training to consulting around transgender rights, how to explain that John will be Jane next week. And John will become the dead name and Jane will be legally accepted and be in the women's bathroom, and this is happening. And that seems to go a little more easy is never a good word with transgender, I think, but a little bit more accepted in corporate than in some of the real male dominated industries. If I see a place where it's not so accepted, it's in really male dominated industries. I'm going to just say construction, anything that is out there like working land and stuff. And the funny thing is they could have transgender people in their world and not know it.
Right.
But they don't know it. And so that's okay. So the transgender person has to hide who they are. The gay person has to hide who they are. So it's becoming much more widely accepted year by year by year. Mm-hmm. But my friends in the LGBTQ community will tell me, you never know how somebody's going to react to you coming out to them. You think everybody's okay with it, Laurie, because you're okay with it.
Right.
They're not okay with it. People are not okay with it. So there is that. And that's why I think we see a lot of rules in the workplace about zero tolerance for bullying, for not having a psychologically safe environment. And frankly, from my trans friends, I know that especially women of color that are transgender, oh my goodness, they die at a higher rate from murder and suicide than anybody, than any other category probably. So it's a physical safety thing too for a trans person.
Yeah. And I know that just out in like society, the LGBTQ plus is more accepted because I'm seeing it now in mainstream TV. So in the shows that I watch, it's now very commonplace to have a gay couple or a lesbian couple, and it's definitely I have definitely seen that. So that's good because again, it's being accepted in mainstream TV. People are aware. I think a lot of people now know that things happen. Life is life, and you're going to fall in love with whoever you want. You're going to be whatever you want, and that's okay. So I am glad to hear that a lot of corporations, companies, big or small, are making it a point to educate themselves and their team. So now, what about leadership? Leadership when it comes specifically to DEI, is that two different things or is that the same thing?
That's my new wake-up call for people is if you think they are still two different things, they are not. So I don't believe that you can be a good, especially a great leader, without an emphasis on having a diverse team. And that doesn't necessarily mean that, let me take that back. It does necessarily mean that people don't all look like you, because representation is really important to people. I did not realize, having been a girl growing up with older brothers and then getting into a very male workplace, I knew I wasn't going to see another person that looked like me probably in certain meetings. I knew that I might be one of one or one of two women in a room. And I was pretty okay with, I was like, okay, guess that's who I am and what I got to do. So I didn't realize how much representation matters to people. But seeing people who look like you in a workplace shows you that that's attainable. Whereas if everybody doesn't look like you, it's not attainable. So with leadership, I think that to be a great leader, you've got to have a diverse team. They bring in different lived experiences. They bring in different thought processes. It's a whole different point of view. And that is the world these days. So it's not a white world out there. And it needs to be reflective of who's out there in our communities and in our on the globe itself. So if we don't actually look at diversity and inclusion, we're missing it. And then we hear things like equity, justice, access, belonging. Those are all things that are really going like the last couple of years. And I think Rhodes nailed it when he wrote his first book, which was Belonging at Work, back in 2018. I just happen to love his work. And because he's launching today, it's fresh on my mind. And then this second one about imagine belonging is about like the vision of wanting to go to work. And as a former leader myself, and I lead my own company now, but as a former corporate leader, my teams always did look diverse before it was a thing, just because I find different people fascinating. I'm naturally curious and I find it fascinating, and I want to hear what was different for you than it was for me and compare stories and all that. That lights me up. Right. So they always did look different, but I didn't know much about equity. I thought equality, and that's a different thing. Equity is about equal access for everybody. And there's a great picture, one that my friend Tony put actually up on my post on LinkedIn, where there are three kids and one's tall and one's medium and one's short, and they're all in the same size box because we're equal. but the little kids still can't see over the fence, and the big kid's way above, and the medium one can just see. And then they get to the point where equity is when you actually make the box size so that all their heads are above the fence and they can all see equally. I'm like, that's a good visual. Tony's went a step further and said, and here's reality. And it was the box was kicked over, the little kid was on the ground. And, that is unfortunately the reality in some places and many places, way too many places.
Right.
But again, I think leadership and diversity, inclusion, equity, belonging has to go hand in hand. It has to.
I love that. And you said that obviously, whenever you have a diverse workforce, there's many different thoughts and ideas. And correct me if I'm wrong, but that also translates into profitability for the company, because the more diverse ideas you have from different people, it's different points of view and different ways of looking at things. And it's not we've always done it that way type thing. So that kind of thought process is out the door. So it's good for the companies too.
Oh, it's been proven over and over. They started the thing on, women in the work, women in year fours will do this, and they're better investors. They're stronger leaders.
Yeah.
Because they bring people and profit in together, rather than just all one way or all the other. So there's actually a lot of data out there, a lot of data. I think Catalyst is a good place to get good data on women and then diversity and the impact to leadership. They did it on if you have a certain number of board members that are female. So it started there, and then it went into, okay, what if we bring in this, and all these diversity categories? Yeah, it's a stronger workplace. And if you're worried about your bottom line, you're going to get a better bottom line the more diverse you are. So if you think you can do without it, your company's going to suffer, your shareholders are going to suffer.
Right. Agreed. Okay. So shifting just a little bit, kind of along the same topic, but I noticed that you have your pronouns in your name under the Zoom. So can you talk to me about this? Like, why are pronouns important, and why do you list them in your name?
Yeah, I put them there because it's time to normalize pronouns. And it did initially come out of the LGBTQ community. I haven't done the research on where'd that come from and when. I just know that my LGBTQ friends brought it to my attention, the first time. And I looked at that and I thought, well, I guess that's for them. And then I realized, well, I'm an ally and I should use them too. And I still felt funny about it. Now I feel funny without them. So I've actually kind of made that transition all the way from it feels weird to it feels weird not to. And there are a number of different combinations. I actually have another acquaintance from when I was in Pennsylvania that has put together a list of a lot of the pronouns that I had never heard of before.
Really interesting.
Yeah, I'm told that other nationalities can have, there's far more than just two genders. It could be 6 genders. It could be, any number of different things. So there's different terminology for that. And by everybody using them, it normalizes them. I did hear a former coworker just put out on Facebook that it did, and he is a straight white guy, that it did his heart good to hear they just did an online, kind of all hands company-wide meeting. And he said every single senior leader stood up and introduced themselves by their name, and my pronouns are.
Oh, that's kind of cool.
Yeah. And it's not preferred pronouns. It's my pronouns, not my preference. It's
my pronouns.
That's what it is.
Taking ownership of that. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, Laurie, this has been an incredibly educational episode. So I am so grateful. Now, there's one other thing that I did want to talk about, which is a little bit more of a tangent, but the Me Too movement. So I know that you said that when you were starting your career, you kind of had to just put up with whatever was happening in the workplace. Yes. Now, I will tell you, as a woman, I am so proud of the women that have come forward for whatever situation. There's been, a million different situations where they come forward and they say, I was abused and this happened to me, and, it goes public or whatever. So can you talk a little bit about how you see either the world changing or corporate changing regarding the Me Too movement?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of zero tolerance now for any kind of nonsense behavior and I think that does go both ways. I know that, typically we think of it as men assaulting or harassing or whatever they're doing to women. Yes. And it crosses gender lines in different funny, weird ways. We want to take all of that out so that it's just not there anymore. And what was interesting was you and I were having a conversation about putting words to things. And I was noting that, way back when, if you got into the workplace in 1978, you put up or shut up. You just sucked it up. When you were looked over for promotion, I spoke up about it, but most people did not. I felt like I had to leave every so often and start over because I was speaking my mind and saying this isn't right. But for the most part, I couldn't have defined what it was in our society. And again, let's go back to systems. Now, when I listen to some of the music from the 60s and especially the 70s, holy cow, it's, the My Angel is my centerfold is a really disgusting song when you look at the words. There's so many like that. It's just the one that popped into my head first. And when we finally, with the Me Too movement, as women have come forward and said, this was me too, this was me too, this was me too. I think there are more of us that are on the yes, me too side than I don't know what you're talking about, nothing ever happened to me. I think more of us are from that. When we look at that, it's just, did we ever have words to define it? Did anybody ever hold the light up and go, that's wrong? Because we knew it was wrong when we were younger. And then we just buried it and buried it and buried it and buried it. And there were no words to describe it. And so we bought into the system. We bought into, this is just the way it is. Boys will be boys. Don't wear your dress so short. Oh, your shirt is too low. It's always on the woman to not get assaulted or raped rather than on the man to not rape.
Exactly.
And
actually,
so weird.
That reminds me of a movie called The Accused with Jodie Foster, where she got raped and then she got blamed because she was wearing a skimpy outfit or whatever. It's just like, oh my gosh, it's so crazy. Well,
and I think a lot of us internalize those messages and went like, well, that was my fault.
Right.
So we couldn't come forward because we probably provoked it. We probably didn't do something right. So it stayed under the covers for a long time. No pun intended.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Laurie, so I'm going to ask you for a couple of actionable tips that you can provide us. And then after that, I'm going to ask you to tell me, what does Aligned at Work do? So if you can talk to us about the 2 actionable tips first, that would be great.
Okay, let's see. So for women at work, I would say an actionable tip is to look around and look at the system that's in place and start keeping track for yourself of, let's say that you're after a promotion. Who gets promoted? What are the actions that they're taking that get them there? A lot of times it's things like networking, being, tracking your accomplishments in business language, getting good sponsorship and being overt about that rather than just hoping it will show up. It's about being very intentional. So take a look at that system and watch what works and what doesn't work, and then feel it in your gut. Do you really want to do this or not? Is there another place out there that it would be better? Because a lot of us stay in bad situations thinking there's nothing better out there, and there is. And there has to be more of it going forward. So that's probably tip number 1. Tip number 2 is, if you're going to get into diversity and inclusion, and just, this is for I guess this would be toward everybody. It is a constantly changing, dynamic, fluid situation. If I get it right today, it's going to be wrong possibly tomorrow. So it takes a lot of courage to do this work. And it takes a lot of protecting your energy and knowing when you've had enough and pulling off for self-care so you can get back into the battle again, because it's a battle right now. And I'm always up for a good fight. So that's the thing is, if you're going to get into it, it's fluid. It's going to change. You're going to be wrong. I probably said 6 wrong things today. And I'll know better tomorrow when somebody points it out to me, and then I can change it and do better.
And I think I love tip number 2. Well, both of those were great, but tip number 2 can actually help the human resources individuals that are managing all of these corporations, right? Whether big or small or whatever size. And actually, it doesn't really matter if it's, corporate or small business. The human resources individuals have to be allies and they have to be advocates for this important work. So for sure. So great. So thank you for those tips. So tell me a little bit about Aligned at Work.
So Aligned at Work is headquartered in Scottsdale, Arizona, in my home office, and global headquarters is on the door. And I created Aligned at Work because I wanted to have people focus from an organizational perspective on people and profit. And I'd seen it done badly. So that was the original idea way back when. It has morphed and changed over time. I love leadership. I've led teams. I know that no one thing works for everybody. I like the ambiguity of it. And so when I came out of corporate after wanting to do this for 22 years and I can't do it now because of this and I can't do it now because of that. Aligned at Work has evolved into a boutique premier leadership firm that balances leadership and diversity and inclusion and makes makes sense of bringing those things together. We also do team alignment. We believe that if people aren't seeing eye to eye, we can really help with that. Executive coaching, career coaching are some of our fortes as well. And people can find out even more on alignedatwork.com.
Awesome. Okay.
And I'm all over LinkedIn, as you know.
Yes.
Because that's how we met. We met via LinkedIn.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. All right, Laurie. Well, thank you so much for this wonderful conversation. I mean, really, it has been enlightening. It's fired me up to make some changes for myself as well. And I hope that it was just an informative and educational message for everybody out there listening. So Laurie, thanks again for everything. And for everybody else, remember to be brave, be bold, and take action.
Thank you for listening to this episode. Let these stories of self-encouragement and professional development serve as a guide in navigating through corporate America in the most practical and fulfilling way possible. Do not forget to subscribe to the show at nowomanleftbehind.com for more content like this. Leave a rating and share it with your friends because we want to make sure that no woman is left behind. Until I see you next time, remember to be brave, be bold, and take action.